Network, Roku TV, Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, and many other streaming platforms. Tonight, I want to bring in um, a beautiful, beautiful person. Again,
Oh, thank
this
you.
is Glenda Dawson from Glenda's Dragons Den. I have LD here with me. And I just wanted to let you guys know that we are on the Conscious Awakening Network on Roku TV, Apple TV, Amazon Fire TV, and many other streaming platforms. Tonight we have a very special guest. His name is George. He loves sacred geometry and he has been able to inspire people and transform them using the whole idea of sacred geometry. Welcome, George. Please tell us all about you.
Okay, well, it's exciting to be here. Thanks for having me on the show and reaching out, Glenda. And
Thank you for being had.
yeah, okay, LD, pleasure to meet you. We had some fun backstage, and you're bringing that right out,
Right out.
right into the open air time. So it's just fantastic to be here. I always love the opportunity to share my passions and interests and share my love for sacred geometry. And it's great because it sounded like this show is really going to kind of get into the backstory. You know, how did I get into this? You know, what was my journey or my path? So I'm excited to share that because that often doesn't come through the YouTube videos that I do, since they're usually around a form or a drawing or something like that, or a bunch of concepts. So
You have about 120 of those, correct?
yeah, I think it's 112. Yeah, about 112 videos on YouTube. And the YouTube channel's only been up about 2 years, a little over 2 years. And I was doing, last year was an expansive year of sacred geometry. I don't know what happened, but the veil was lifted for me in a way. And I did pretty much a video a week, over 54 videos, including teaching at least once or twice a week, recording all those videos for my apprentice group that I work with. So I just accumulated a huge amount of volumes of information from teaching in hands-on activity, and also sharing a lot of that through these videos. So it's
Where
quite
do you teach?
really.
Where do you teach?
Well, that's all on Zoom, and I've done a lot of Zoom for this, and some in person. I've done some teaching with Nancy Beneroff, who's a co-geometer, that we work together and do yoga studios, and we've done some artist lofts and things like that. So a little bit more hands-on and in-person instruction as well over the past year.
I think that's the best with mathematics. I always did much better one-on-one.
Yeah.
You know, my son, not, you know, he could take it in mass, but me, I really needed that additional explanation, I guess it is, or clarification.
Yes. Yeah, the in-person and even the Zooms work great. And it's not just strictly math. I think the math will start to become more apparent and intuitively doing it as you start to work with the shapes and the circles. You know, there's a lot of circle drawings, for instance, and line connecting. And there's a lot of math in this diagram, but I could do all of it. And then we could talk about the math after. And once you have that kind of practical experience of just kind of getting in the zone with the drawing, then all of a sudden, when we get into those mathematical concepts, you have a place to kind of hang your code on a little bit, right? You just did all that legwork of doing the drawing. You might actually be more curious about it now that you've done that drawing. Like, what is actually in this? And why is it called sacred geometry, right? Like, what's it all about? And some of that relates to the math part of it. Yeah.
Well, how did you feel when you first saw it happen in nature before perhaps you even got into it? Did it speak to you when you would see it like in a sunflower pattern or?
Yes. Oh, totally. I mean, I don't know if you know my other background, but that's a huge part of it. I mean, most people in this community now know me as someone who teaches sacred geometry, but for about 25 years, I studied wildlife tracking and animal tracking.
Mm,
And
okay.
my first profession, let's say, was a guide of taking people into the wilderness, showing them animal signs, showing them flowers, showing them plants, identifying, learning the pattern language of nature as a tracker. And I became one of the internationally, recognized one of these top international trackers, teaching people these skill sets.
Mm,
And that really was a deep foundation for how I made this kind of switch into sacred geometry, because the pattern language, even though we're on pencil and paper, I had a knack and an eye for reading and interpreting symbol signs, patterns, because of all that nature education that I had put
mm.
myself in for all those years.
Where
So,
regionally were you doing that?
well, I live in Vermont, and my backyard is a big forest playground for that type of activity. So,
Mm.
we have snow in the wintertime here, so it's a great carpet, let's just say, a fresh, usually sometimes fresh dusting of snow. And, it's like sand, you could follow track, if put it maybe deep sand sometimes, but you can follow trails for long, long distances. And, I have people from all over the world come to visit me here to learn tracking skills. And I've been all over teaching tracking too. So that's been a big foundation. So thanks for bringing that up. I was definitely going to get into that topic because it's foundational to why how the observation skills were transferable.
Mhm.
Like a real grounding place. Great to get kids engaged with that when they're younger. It opens up a lot of observation and questioning and curiosity, and gets their senses engaged and alive. It turns on intuitive faculties that we all have in us to kind of,
Mhm.
have those gut feelings about things and learn to trust those and listen to the sounds and get into the silence when you're out there. All that was like how I approach sacred geometry, that training that I went through. So that's
Yes, it's good that you both talked about it because people don't realize that everything is a pattern.
Mhm.
Even chaos.
Even chaos is a pattern.
Yeah,
And sacred geometry, you could look all around and you could actually see it. Just people don't know how to really look for it.
yeah.
So,
Yeah, definitely. I was thinking maybe one of the questions would be, well, what is sacred geometry? It's a typical question, and I was going to reverse that question. I know you didn't ask it. I'm glad you didn't, because it's kind of just a primer question, really. But it's like, what isn't, right? I mean, if you approach it from that angle,
mhm.
you've got a big rabbit hole to go through before you could find out what isn't something sacred or a geometry. Now, I know sacred is a loaded word for a lot of people, but it's really an approach to how you approach your surroundings with reverence, and
Mhm.
seeing these patterns speak to you in a way that moves you into a deeper feeling place inside. So sacred can mean a lot of different things to a lot of people. That's just one interpretation. But what is it? That's a great question. That's a great tracking question that people would ask. What isn't a track? Like,
Mhm.
what isn't a track? What isn't something that you can be curious and ask questions about? So
Mhm.
Well, I think it's a question of mindfulness. People get hung up on a word or language. Uh, I think that's because it's a way of distracting themselves from actually thinking. They just want to give that knee-jerk response.
yeah,
But when you're mindful, you understand that everything is sacred because everything is connected. If not obviously, then in quantum physics.
right.
So we work the same way with paranormal. People say, "Well, what's paranormal?" And I say, "Define normal." They do. I say, "Okay, everything else."
um, yeah, LD, you're really hitting it, because my tracking school that I have set up is called Mindful Tracker. That's the
Yeah.
the approach is
Mhm.
like you say. It's a very mindful approach. It tends to move away from trying to approach the subject, and this is the same way to do it with sacred geometry. To approach it in a way that you don't go into just trying to label and find something. You know, when you have that attention and drive to look at something, to look, to find, you often don't see what's there, right? So you have to be open to let, the thing in nature that you're observing, communicate to you and wait for it to present itself. And it's the same way that I approach these drawings. I don't know where I might be going when I start it, and you just let it work. And you know the pattern language because you've done it a lot, so you know your A, B's, and C's. You could start to construct sentences out of that, and it just unfolds, and then the gem starts to emerge. After you engage in that. So it's a different approach than trying to go into sacred geometry to create a piece of art, do this or do that. You can certainly have that intention, but my approach is definitely more open-ended and develop a dialogue, really, a relationship and a communication with what this is trying to teach you. Not only information, but teach you about your process and about yourself, right? And how you relate to it. And that's really key.
Well, the challenge, I think, is that the mind is trained itself to try and recognize patterns because our perceptions are so limited. So we get the information in ways that we can perceive it, and then we try to relate it to the known. So I think it's very important, like you said, to get out of that box and use all of your senses to experience it and see where it takes you and be open to it instead of trying to force it into your cognitive understanding.
Yeah, exactly. Yep, totally. I mean, it's like you got to be comfortable with the unknown. And I mean, I say that when I'm in the forest with the trackers, and I also say that with the sacred geometry students. This last drawing I did with my group, I said, let's just draw. I'm not even going to tell you where we're going. We're going to follow this trail out, and the things are going to emerge as we go along. And then I'm going to ask questions about where you think we might be going, what's going on, right? And really approach it without labeling what you think it is, but what are you seeing there on the page through a more basic shape, pattern, color, texture type of language rather than I think it's a, cube or something like that, right? Don't put it in the box. Let it just be something more than what you think it is, because it might be something more than what you is. And that's something I'm always doing with sacred geometry. I'm looking at the depth because it's a 2D flat piece of paper. But within that, it's got all this dimensionality in the depth and the lines, and you could reach into it and pull out forms because you're playing with that space in a way that doesn't define it. And I'm constantly doing that and finding new forms and discoveries through that type of process.
Which I'm sure helps you remember a lot of your past lives, your past gifts, because they're communicating through that sacred geometry form. I know that that's how it's worked for me many times.
Yeah.
Where I sit there, I'm like, oh, okay, got it. And just the art talks to me,
Yeah.
whatever form it is. And then I start seeing that same pattern in nature, start seeing it when I'm even doodling and I start seeing it and I'm like, huh, okay, I'm doing the exact same pattern over and over and over. And it's like, okay, I got it. But, so I can see that happening through all of sacred geometry. If people would just not go in there with a box, they
Yeah.
just go in there with an open mind.
Yeah. Well, I think they're in the patterns like you're describing. There is a thread and connection that is like a seed. That remember, these patterns are ancient, so they've been around. A lot of them have been around for a long time. So when you reincarnate, when you incarnate again, you're going to have some seed memory that image that was way back then is showing up again now, right? And all of a sudden, it carries some sort of bit of information that is going to move you in a certain way, right? Some sort of design. And if you follow that trail, the rest of those questions kind of start to evolve on their own, right? There's an inclination why you start to get drawn to something, and it brings you down into a deeper sense of connection through that long incarnation chain, So I think that the patterns definitely hold that memory and that awakening memory, and that's why there's an essential part of the awakening process. They hold that sort of seed information. And I don't try to put too much emphasis on interpreting what the pattern means for anybody, or even giving what my interpretation is for it, because it really is going to mean something different for every person. So they have to discover that for themselves. It's more like, let's do this and let's see what it evokes in you. Like, let it be open for them, rather than be like, this symbol always means this and this is that pattern. There's certain things are, a language that we use in sacred geometry, but a lot of it is a process of discovery that needs to be teased out by the explorer of that terrain. And I think that's really, really key. It's not about feeding new information, more and more knowledge of the subject. It's, here's some skills, here's some tools. Start working with these if you're drawn to this. What's going to come and emerge out of you? And that's the KNEW, the new part in the sacred geometry. That's why it's called KNEW, new geometry, and not NEW geometry, because that's what I'm hoping will instill that type of energy in people that will just move on its own, right? And you just give a little spark, give a little direction, and let's see what takes off, right? And that's the important part for me.
And that's the beauty in the system, because we are inertly put in the box, with our indoctrinations as we're children, but we're all here to have that unique awakening that we came to have. We're all here to find our own epiphany. So as we go through this, and it takes us to that awakening, yet it has the thread back to the sameness of the resonance of where it came from. Am I making sense to you?
Yeah, well, it contains that thread that you're talking about through it, right? And I guess it has to be discovered, and I think for each person on their own. So there are stories, there's inspirational stories that others can share with you that we should, rejoice about, like someone else's journey. It's like, that's what I think you two are helping to do with your show. It sounds like, is bringing people on, hearing their stories, rejoicing in their discoveries. For some of the shows or episodes, probably that's what you're doing. At least that's the way we're trying to do it here. And, you rejoice in that. And then it moves people like in their own little process of awakening for themselves. Right. So it's inspirational stories, but it's not really like follow that path because that's how they did it. You might want to do that for a little while, because there's certainly things to learn along the way, right? There, you follow someone else's trail. I do that with geometers all the time. I get really into, or a tracker, I get really into their material for a while, got what I needed from that, and then go off on the path again, right? Because there's something in their journey that is going to really be igniting for you along the way. You look through their worldview for a bit, but it's not to take over. It's not to take their worldview and make it yours. It's you to discover your own series of relationships of what it means. And that's the big key.
So I understand people come to you with a certain understanding of what perhaps they're looking to open up in themselves, but how do you get them to feel comfortable enough and safe enough to do that?
Yeah, well, the geometry apprentices that I work with, or even with the one-on-one mentoring, I think it has to come down to how this material works with your own presence. I think it's not something that someone has to do. It's more the quality that you hold to be an open container to help that evolve on its own, right? So
you hold the truths to be self-evident.
Yeah, you just you have a focus. I have a focus with the drawing, so there's going to be the activity. So we just go through that, and there's always kind of a getting to know each other probably type phase, and then you go through these deepening, because the drawings or nature is working on them anyway, and it's not too long before the cycle reaches a point where those inner questions come up. It happens naturally. So I don't have to go in there really much with like a crowbar. Let's get into that stuff, right? Like let's bust it open and get into the deep stuff, right?
Right.
You let the process, the sacred process, like the ancient techniques, the old school techniques of doing this, you let that work and do its magic. Some people, it doesn't really happen much. It's just, you just keep at it, Maybe this wasn't the way to approach it for them. Some people, they keep working on it. This is a process is working. And then those contemplative questions start to come up. So I guess what I mean, the presence of that is not to force anything, right? I don't have the agenda for people to go through a transformation process. I trust it's going to happen in their own time.
And they have to trust it's going to happen.
Exactly. And that's what you're building trust between one another and through the activity. So it's more of that type of dynamic happening, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, I understand you've got some visual aids for us.
I do. I've got a gazillion visual aids. Let's, I could go through some of the drawings that we did with the apprentices this time, because this is
Would you please?
Yes.
Group. So our first lesson was to work with the Platonic solids. So this is, a foundation building blocks of sacred geometry.
Mm-hmm.
And there are 5 Platonic solids on here. And we did the initial layout of the whole diagram so we could draw them all on the same page. And then I wanted to show how they were all nested inside the cube, right? So we could really make some visual comparisons between them to see, like, how does this form actually fit in here, right? Like, and then of course I have the models, so I can hold up the model and talk about the model. So, this is thousands of year old information here that we're working with to learn the drawing techniques of these. So that was kind of the intro drawing. It, took a couple sessions to do. Mind you, I don't do the same drawing each group. It's always alive for me. So it's always an evolving process.
Right.
But I wanted to show you one more in that sequence. So the one we did after that, because it's a really key part of the perceptual shift. And let me just see where that one is. Hold on.
Do you do these freehand?
Well, everything is done with the compass and straight edge. So, the drawing compass that you probably used in geometry, that was probably one that makes most people hate geometry because the radius is always changing and the circles skittering around and everything like that. I recommend people get a good compass so their drawing process is nice and smooth.
Right.
And the straight edge is just a ruler and then a mechanical pencil. So then we just do all the drawings with those 3 simple techniques of those 3 tools, and then the techniques. So here's the other one I wanted to show you. This is the Platonic solids. We did this one in the same group.
Mm-hmm.
Each from a different view of the 5 Platonic solids. So this is a different perspective. It's like you've taken the form and we've drawn it like this. Mm-hmm. And now all of a sudden I rotated it on the page so you're looking at it like this.
Mm-hmm.
And then we also do it looking like this with the pentagon face. So we do different views. And this is really a key part of changing the perspective on the page, because it's easy to always look at something one way and think that's what it looks like. But when you shift the perspective, new information, new quality of the form, a new feeling of the form emerges. So those are some of the drawings that we did. And I interspersed that with discussing of the forms. Mm. And I'd say that perspective shift is definitely one that applies to something people can apply in their daily life. Is just changing your perspective, looking at your view, taking a different view of something. It's definitely a key one of the perspective shift on the page. Like doing that in the geometry seems to be has an effect on people usually. The time to connect to.
And when can you start introducing this to children? At what age would you say?
I would say early on. I mean, first of all, most of the kids' toys that you see out when they're real little are fit this triangle in this triangle shape, right? Here's building blocks. Let's make blocks, right? So, having a set of these forms around is definitely part of the early tactile feeling of the connection. There's a reason why those kids are like so excited about that stuff, because they have that memory already deep in them, right? It's like they're close to it. So working with shape and color and pattern recognition and all that is really, really close. So having these types of forms around just gets them intuitively connected to it. And then, you know, as 6 or 7 comes around, probably around that age, you can get more into the hand-drawn compass stuff. Before that, mostly just drawing by freehand, right? You know, just doodling, making circles, you know, connect the dots. Doesn't have to be precise, but as time goes on, you get a little more precision. You start to introduce more of the mathematical concepts that could be associated with this. And I think that that's a really strong foundation, you know, for the future of kids' development. You know, it's just right now, sacred geometry, you know, contains all that, but it's probably not accepted by many of families because it's gone so esoteric, let's say, that some basic practical applications for our own cognitive development at those young ages, people frown upon. You show them a pentagon, forget it. Pentagram, right? Pentagram? It's like, uh-oh, that's
no. Yeah.
news, but I draw pentagrams all the time. Doesn't matter if they're upside down, right side up, because they're part of the forms. I can't change it. It's like part of a geometric structure. So, and it contains the golden ratio to the most beautiful representation of the golden ratio is in the pentagram. And it's right in front of people's faces, but it's turned into a symbol of fear. So,
well, that's how you keep people from learning it and playing with it and becoming independent is by introducing fear into it. And you know, oh, don't do that, you'll hurt yourself.
yeah, it's unfortunate with sacred geometry. I don't even pay attention to that, honestly, because if you talk about the truth of it, right, like what's really there for the truth of it, and get down to out of that fear syndrome, then you know you talk about it in a really intelligent way, and that alleviates those fears. And people who have been fearful of that, it's really kind of freeing for them to engage with this material because they see the beauty of it, they see the harmony of it, they see why it's sacred because of all the dynamics that are in it. So you know, I don't address that too much because I don't really put any attention on it. It's like putting attention on that is just like keeping that alive in a way. So I don't feel like I'm fighting against that. I feel like forget it. That's old school. You know, that's we don't need that anymore. It's just going to keep us down in the dark ages, and we got to like accelerate out of that and be like, this is some beautiful interconnected wholeness connection. There isn't anything bad about it. It's just another form of geometry, and put their own distorted consciousness associated with those things have created the distortions. It's not the geometry, it's the use of it, you know, and how it's been presented.
Right. Now, for me, sacred geometry also gives me light language.
Yeah.
Like I see the light language symbols actually coming out at me. And I know a couple of other people that, you know, once they look at whatever the flower, whichever actual symbol or shape, and we could actually see within that the light language symbols, which to me is very interesting. And if people would just open up, take a deep breath, people, and look at the different layers, like you were saying, you can actually go in there and see and remember what that was all about.
Yeah.
And what people don't understand is that within those symbols, you could communicate with other species, other consciousness, conscious dimensions, frequencies, and people are just closing their eyes to it. And I think it's wonderful that you're bringing it back out, that you're actually introducing people back to their original form. Because with sacred geometry, we do go back to who we really are.
Right.
You know, if you like you said, the layers, go into those layers, and you will see who you really are and feel who you really are.
Yeah.
Not this bodysuit that we have right now, but
Right.
the realness in you.
Yeah. Definitely. That's, it's kind of like the unspoken journey. I don't, force anybody on that path because maybe they're not thinking they want to go that way, but that if they get on it, they're going to that's going to unfold. And it really activates the clairvoyance, like you're describing, of getting into that. Like, I did so much of the wildlife scene that all those layers of the connection to the animals and the plants and all that, it really was really quite alive in me, all that, through all that activity in the wilderness settings. So that when I started to look at the sacred geometry patterns, it was like I was experiencing, connecting, and feeling and seeing what, that type of connection. So I'm able to look at these patterns and see the light language that you're describing in the pattern and really explore it and have it become a communication, a messenger through the image, that are teaching me more about myself and my journey and my process. So it's all interconnected. So a lot of it activates it really works, with all your centers, but the third eye, the mind's eye connection, being able to see images in your mind, be able to rotate them around, see three-dimensional space. It activates not only your physical vision, but your inner vision. All that's connected to some of the things that I find sacred geometry can really connect to. And of course, the heart space. I mean, everything, usually kind of connects back to the heart space, but it seems to be a little bit more, for some, at least the way I approach it, probably a little bit more on the mind's eye approach.
Right.
Some will approach it more from the heart and allow just their intuition to go through it. They'll just leave the mathematics out of it, not get engaged with any of that, and just let the inspiration flow through them like that. So there's really no right or wrong way to do it. It just goes back to our, like you said, past incarnations that have certain tendencies that you're working out, different things that are within the diagrams that are special and unique to you, and each of our unique attributes that this is evoking within us, unique qualities. So that's unique for everybody. So there's no right or wrong way to engage with it. And it's going to activate some people clairvoyance, some people clairaudience, whatever it might be. There may be some way that it will speak to you, right? Different for other people.
Definitely.
Has it helped you in your ability to communicate with nature and communicate with the animals when you're out tracking?
Well, it's tough one for me to go back and reverse that one, because when you do something for 25 years, and are really deep into it, it's really well woven, because the interface for me is just so, there's no disconnect between the two. So I would say that's a tough question for me to tease apart. I just know that so much of the nature connection transferred over. Now, what I did observe with some of my apprentices was they didn't have a strong nature connection background, and they did the first apprenticeship with me, and for 8 weeks, it's an 8-week apprenticeship or somewhere in the middle of it. All of a sudden, they started taking pictures of nature and slow, trails of like different things on their windows, and all sorts of different things. So I was like, oh, that's really interesting to me, because it seems like this activation of this connection through the drawing for them was working in the reverse way than it did for me, right? I came to the nature, to the sacred geometry. For them, it was an enlivening, enriching their nature connection, and vice versa. So that's what I observed, at least with them. It definitely highlighted and heightened their outer nature connection that you're describing. I guess inner nature connection too, both of them.
Yeah, I could see that. I could definitely see that, because nature, there's so much in nature you could really connect with, and you could connect with yourself, which then you could also use sacred geometry to connect with everything else. So Yeah. It opened up something in them, that's for sure.
Yeah.
Now you were talking about an 8-week apprentice, and then what happens after that if they want to continue with
Well,
you?
I started doing the returning apprentice group. So that is set up for apprentices who've already gone through one session. So
Mhm.
they'll go through another 8 weeks. And I had some people stick with me through 3 or 4 sessions all last year for 8 weeks at a time. So they really dove deep into the subject. So that was beautiful to see. So the returning apprenticeship, you would just go into deeper layers, do a little bit more complex drawings once people get the basics, get more into the 3D-ness and seeing how those things work through the connections of the forms to the paper. So people start to activate more of that perspective shift and start to understand what it is they're looking at and seeing on the page. Because not usually most people don't know what's in there. And then they start to get to a point where their own creative instincts start to just take over and they produce more of just what comes to them rather than kind of following through basically a drawing sessions.
Okay.
So that's
Now, have you experienced that they heal, like they have a moment where they find themselves healing because of the process?
I would say in terms of like any type of sickness or anything like that, I would say I don't have a lot of data on that, for
Right.
something like a direct healing, like something around that. But in terms of a healing, like from maybe discontent or disconnection
Right.
feeling or, a lack of joy or something like that, or, finding one's purpose or, things like that, I have seen a huge amount of giddiness and joyfulness of just working with the patterns, how people can light it, lights them up in a way. And it's kind of an abstract subject, but it's doing something that is turning on some sort of circuitry inside whatever that person needs for that feeling of connection. It's just kind of doing it on its own. So it's not like I'm doing anything. It's like, oh, the drawing's just producing that result.
Right.
And I've seen that, across the board in the apprenticeships. And I think that's why there's such a high return rate, in the apprenticeships, because it's an infinite amount of subject that you can get into, but there's also the feeling that you're engaged with, especially with the group, as you get to know them more. You get into the feeling, you feel like you could express yourself, talk about spiritual related concepts to these groups you might not be able to do that in, and you have this activity to do it through. It just feels really like maybe like a coming home or like a small little group you could do that in, and that brings a lot of joy to people.
So, how do people get more information on these apprenticeships?
Yep, that's at New Geometry, KNEW Geometry Courses, and that's the my whole website there. That one is just related to the courses and a little bit of overview. There it is. Thank you for putting it up. And newgeometry.space, that's another website. My first one, it gives a little bit more overview of the background of the geometry, more images and things like that. There's a write-up for the apprenticeships on both, but basically the links for enrolling are at New Geometry Courses. And the courses are great. That course site that I'm using, it lays out the whole curriculum itinerary. We put the live videos in afterwards as recording, and people can work on them, for as long as they want. You always have that information. I got a couple other courses that are, just me doing videos of drawings, and a free drawing that you can just go and get for free. The Sri Yantra symbol up here, this one here, a classic 9-triangle design.
Mhm.
I have a nifty method of drawing that gets you into the basics. It gives you a materials list and an intro to do it. You can just jump in and draw that, Sri Yantra design and start to experience these techniques. If you haven't done any drawing, it's a great intro video and a 33 lesson drawing guide that I put together. So for instance, this is the little drawing guide. Oops, upside down probably. And it goes through little step-by-step instructions. So it's 33 steps to walk you through the layout of the design, and that could be very very enriching to start you on the path if you haven't done this type of thing before. So
that's very nice, and that is a very powerful pattern.
Very much so. That's why I really wanted to create that as part of the free content, because I feel it's a beautiful one to have access to. I mean, the other courses are great, but I'm really getting into depth of teaching. This one, I don't get into the philosophy. There's so much culture around it. I'm like, we're just going to do the drawing. I'm not going to get into teaching about everything about it. So it's really open-ended, but it gets you. I think most people have a hard time crossing the fence, getting off the fence to be like, all right, I'm going to do that, right? It's like, it's a practice, So if you sign up for the 8-week apprenticeship, all of a sudden it's like, it's an initiatory step, really. You're entering into like an initiation of sacred geometry. You're going to do this for 8 weeks. You're going to set up as a practice. You're going to work through this.
Right.
So, you're really taking a step to do it. This one for the free thing, free Sri Yantra, you could just test it out, see if you want to do this. You don't have to create a practice, but that image is so powerful. It's such a great one. You might not want to get into how do you draw this form? How does this form turn into this form? Like all those nuts and bolts details, which are amazing drawings that they teach you so much about the golden proportion and all these sacred geometry concepts, how to draw the spirals.
Mm-hmm.
Not everybody has that calling, but, I have an entry level for anybody. Anybody can enter in at different points. One other thing, pyramid class, like drawing and constructing the pyramids, the golden ratio pyramids, both the Russian pyramids, which are an interesting golden ratio pyramid constructed like this, as a cone with golden spirals that are on it like this. All these templates and forms I give you all these forms to build, because part of the memory is in the hands, like you're a little kid again, right? Mm-hmm. And when you cut out these forms and you make them, that's doing something. A lot of this is behind the scenes. You don't know, you don't have a conscious blueprint of what it is, but when you make this stuff, it's saying something, it's communicating something that's beyond words, right? And that's why we have these symbols,
right.
Why we do these projects. It's beyond words communication, but evokes that joyfulness, connected feeling. It's hard to say what that is, right? Or what did it.
Mm-hmm.
It's funny because when you mention how it brings out the inner child, as you were rotating that initial shape, and you got to the point where all of a sudden it became a 5-pointed shape, it's like, oh wow, that's a neat trick. I could just see a kid as you take that and you rotate it that way, and they get that whole perspective. Like, what?
Mm-hmm.
Where can someone find the free course?
That's on New Geometry Courses. It's right there on the 5 or 6 courses that are lined up there. New Geometry Courses, and that's a great offering. Now, if you're listening to this and you're like, man, I want to go for this, like I'm in all in. Mm-hmm. I have all 45 videos from the first year of apprentices, the whole first year of apprenticeships on there. And that is a tremendous offering. I mean, the whole first year, 45 videos, that's nearly, almost one a week, hour and 15-minute sessions, hour and a half roughly. That's just huge. I mean, that will take someone so far in their journey of sacred geometry. The only thing you do is you get to miss the live interaction, but it's at a significantly marked down price than what the whole, what individual apprenticeships are. So if someone's really in there, that's in that whole lineup of courses. If you like that idea, check that out. I think that's a really awesome offering. It's kind of, you create some of this stuff because it's what you wish you had when you got into the subject. If I saw that with my passion about the subject, I would be in on it right away, because it's like 45 practical drawing lessons. Now, the practical thing is important in this. You can't skip to like all the. For me, at least, I like to have the practice of the practical, because it helps me engage and connect to the spirit even more in depth, of like the deeper connection to it. rather than just jumping to the esoteric spirit thing and not having something grounded there. There's a nice balance between the two. So if you're really into the wanting a practical path, this is a great, full immersion, or the live apprenticeship, which is just fantastic too. So a lot of offerings to check out. There's a whole list. More will be coming because there's just a never-ending thing. So keep up to date. If the New Geometry YouTube channel, like I said early on, I have 120 videos roughly on there, or close to. That I'm always updating every week or so, or every couple weeks, with new video, new content, and that's a good way to stay engaged with New Geometry, just through the YouTube channel. Oh, and I forgot the other one. Sorry. Facebook group. I have a Facebook group, New Geometers, KNEW Geometers Facebook group. That group almost has 3,000 members in it now, and they are really just inspiring because they're working with patterns, showing their artwork, having great conversations and discussions, range of different people. Some are working with the techniques I work with. So it's a great group, New Geometers Facebook group, if you're on Facebook. It's the simplest way you can engage in the community. Because for me, it's much more about developing. Thank you for putting it up. It's so important to develop a community around this, and that are sharing in this pattern language. So the community aspect is an important part of my work with New Geometers. It's not just to show you what I'm doing and this is what I created, but then create that excitement in a group, and to have it be about them and the connections they forge. So the community experience is really important part of the kind of New Geometry mission.
Have you seen any evolution of people that, let's say, have suffered trauma and they come in with some form of a dissociation, and they're in their head?
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden they begin to come back and do that healing where they can connect back into the emotional piece of it. Have you seen that transformation?
Now, that sounds like a Jungian type of thing, way to go about it, like, because I know he did a lot of work with watching people who have suffered trauma in that emotional state to work with mandalas or their dreams to start to reconnect with those things that may have happened, to kind of work through that and process it through the artwork. Now, I'm not trained to do that in that way, and I haven't had someone to join the apprenticeship that I'm aware of that is working through something, at least that they would voice openly within that type of group, to give you any feedback on it. But since Jung and probably other psychologists or people who work with people with spiritual mentors or guides or whatever, may do these type of activities with drawings and dream recall or things like that to help someone work it through. I would say the drawing is probably a big part of it. Whether working with like very technical straight edge and compass is important for that type of process, I'm not sure. Maybe for some, but I don't have a good feedback for you. But I would imagine that is probably something that would be helpful for certain people. Definitely.
Well, I'll phrase it a different way so it's not as clinical. Have you noticed people come out of this a lot more centered than they went into it? Is that fair to ask? Yeah,
definitely. I mean, I could think of a few apprentices who, are just trying to find their way, and I think it's, just younger apprentices and older ones too. We're all trying to find our way, whatever stage of life. Just because you may be older doesn't mean you found your way. But, it's especially, some of the younger generation, like, it's given a sense of connection to that inner true self, something inner spirit, ignites the spark within. And that has definitely been transformative for many of them to kind of find a sense of purpose through this activity that they can relate and connect to many other areas in their life. I've observed that, and continue to watch in new geometers what they're up to, see how this is continuing to be something that drives them in their discovery process. It's really moving to me to see the power of sacred geometry. You know, the transformational potential that's there. It's like a lifeline back to your essence, you know, and that's really key. And you don't have to talk about it that way. You know, you just know that if it's done with the open attitude, not trying to make it happen for anybody, you do it in the sacred ways, teach the principles of it. It has the ability to find that thread for people. So it's experiential. It's nice to talk about it, but only one person could experience it for themselves. But honestly, I'm an example of that. You know, like we have to talk about it from ourselves. Like, you know, when I'm feeling a little lost or whatever, the tracking, nature connection, finding solace in nature, don't know who I am, like where I'm going, what I want to be, any of those things. It's like that lifeline of the natural connection and listening to the sounds and getting into the silence. That's like the home base, you know. If you come from there, what you put your mind and energy into is going to be coming from that root, because that's what you're coming from now. And sacred geometry is another way to do that. And it's only shown me that through experience too. Hopefully that answers your question, LD. It's definitely an experiential approach.
Well, again, I'm asking questions for people that are trying to justify it for themselves.
Yeah.
You know, to help them perhaps experience it through the mechanisms that you already have set up for them to play with it, and then see if they're drawn to it. Because I had a lot of experience with a Native American reservation where I lived for a few years.
Yeah.
And I made that connection there for myself at a young age. So, you know, I agree with you. At any age, you can still evolve.
Yeah.
And I think that's an important message to anyone that gets to watch this video.
Yeah.
Mhm.
You know, you don't have to be so tall or so short to ride this curve.
Right. Well, it's you know, there isn't a destination on that journey. You know, it's continually showing up in the present moment with it, and sacred geometry does have that effect to watch your thought process when you're doing the drawing. You know, like how much time can you give this to? How much is it wandering off to something else? So you're really giving yourself to get out of your mind and to let be with this process of doing your drawing and connecting to it, coloring it, right? You know, there's a lot of books recently, or at least in the past 10 years, those geometric art coloring books that came out to help people connect to slowing down and, you know, being creative with geometric art. This is another level of that, because you're going to engage in the pattern language of an ancient tradition, you know, and learn those techniques and skills. So, you know, the compass is a symbol for consciousness, right? You know, the point that you put down on the paper, when you put that needle on the paper, it's like a direct link to the act of creation where you're going to make that circle. So you want your attention to put it on that point, you know, right at the right spot, because the more it's off in all those little areas, it's all a connected web. So all the circles will be all over. Now, there's nothing wrong with that, but the more you bring yourself and the attention and hearing the lead scrape around the paper and lining up the rulers and making sure it's even, I mean, you could really lose yourself in that type of activity and see what comes to you. You know, it's like it's a good mirror. That's what it is. It's like a mirror. Your drawing is looking back at you like a mirror, as a reflection of like where your conscious mind was within this activity. And here it is at the end of it.
And more often than not, you have to lose yourself to find yourself.
Yeah, definitely. So there's just a richness to it that you know, people may be able to make parallels to other things they've done in their life, because it's one technique, right, of many ways to kind of connect to that. And this is one that I, you know, am advocating for, because I've seen the growth in other people and for myself. But it's many paths that, lead to that type of connection and getting to know oneself. But it's a really great one.
Well, we've only got a few minutes left. If you could put a message out there to people that are hesitant about surrendering to this, what would that be?
The message. Yeah, I guess, one would have to really search into that core place, and what are you seeking from the activity? Like, what is what's the purpose that is the calling? Like, do you have the calling, right? To step into this further? It's definitely a calling. If you're on the fence, it's like, am I prepared to let this be my guide, and teach me and be my mentor? So you have to trust your guidance. You got to just trust your inner vision. Have you been guided along the path to be here listening to this, to have seen some video last week? Like, what are the signals that you're paying attention to, maybe loosely, that are all adding up, synchronistically? That's going to be different for everybody. But if the synchronicities are all adding up and they're like, I should really give that a try, because I've seen it now here. I remember that image years ago. It really was inspiring for me. There might be something in that for me. Well, then that's the universe maybe selling you a little something, that says, hey, this might be something. There might be something in this for you, even if it's just for a short time. And so that would be my kind of summary: is just in your guidance, pay attention to the synchronicities. You'll know when the time is right, and the time will come, usually comes for many people to connect to this type of activity at some point in their journey. It seems to be a thing that's all around us, and it is you. It's in your body, so you're already connected. You can't be disconnected. This is just one way to explore it. So that's my invitation, and the openings there. The course site will be there. Apprenticeships will keep going on. So if you file it away, come back when you're ready. I'll be continuing on. So
Yes. So it sounds very good. It's like I tell my students, all different tools. Your willingness to grab on another tool, put it in your toolbox, because you never know which tool you're going to need.
But the first step is you have to give yourself that permission.
Yes, and take those steps. Surrender.
Definitely. Well, it sounds like we're moving towards the end of the show, but I really, I definitely appreciate the time, the questions, that a bit to share about my journey with the sacred geometry, and talking about the nature connection and weaving it all together. You really did such a great job hosting. I had so much fun with the two of you.
Well, please hold for a second. I just want to say thank you to all our audience, and we look forward to seeing you next week, next Wednesday at 9 p.m. Eastern, same place. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for